In a previous video, I talked about using aggregate functions, count, max, min, average, or sum. And we did an exercise where we'll just say, how many books do we have, or how many books are in the computer category? Let's just do a count. But what if the question was, how many books do we have in each category? So to answer that question, let me scroll down, we're going to introduce another clause called GroupBy. All right, so we're going to select the category, and then we're going to count how many books are in each category. And in order to tell the system that we want to count books in category, we have to group by category. So what happens when we run that exercise is now, rather than getting one number back, we're going to get one number back for each category. So for instance, we have 1 business book, 2 children, 4 computer, 2 cooking, 2 family life, etc. So now we're doing a count by category. So let me do a demonstration in Excel of what's really going on when we run that query. So here I have the books table in an Excel spreadsheet, and recall the order of processing of a SQL statement. We start with the from clause, and so in this case we're going to say from books. So the system will grab the table books. All right. The second thing we'll do is look at the where clause, and if there was a where clause, it's going to eliminate those records that don't meet the where clause condition. So for instance, if I said where the retail price is greater than let's say 30, it's going to eliminate all of these rows or records where the retail price is less than that condition, than 30. So those rows will get eliminated. Finally, what happens is we hit that group by, and I said I want to group by category. And so essentially what's kind of happening behind the scenes is it sorts the data. All right, it groups the data is probably a better way to describe it. It groups the data by the thing you told it to group by, category. Finally, that runs up to the select statement that has a count, right? And we said, well, we want to count star. All right, I want to count the records in each category. Well, because they're grouped by category, I can now see that I have 2 in this category. I have 4 in this category, 2 in this category, right? And then it's doing that based on the records that remain after the where clause. So, of course, the where clause gets rid of any records that don't meet our criteria. We then group the data by the thing that we ask it to group by, and then it'll do counts or sums or averages of things in our group. So let's do another example. Let's say I want to sum the retail price by pub ID. Pub ID is a reference to the various publishers. Okay, so I want to know the total amount of retail dollars we have by each publisher ID. So first we'd say select pub ID from books, group by the pub ID. All right, so what the system's going to do is grab the books table. That's then, if we had a where clause, it would eliminate those records that don't meet the condition of the where clause. And then finally, it would sort or group on the pub ID. All right, and then it would go through and say, okay, here's a group. Now, what are they asking for? So I think I said sum retail. So then it would add up those 2 records for pub ID 1. And then it would add up these 2 records for pub ID 2, etc. Right? So I'm going to add up those 3 for pub ID 3 and these 4 records for pub ID 4. So that's what GroupBy does for you. It groups the records based on the things that you list in the GroupBy clause, and then it will do whatever aggregate function you put in the select statement, whether it's a sum, a max, a min, a count. It will do that function based on the groups that you specify. So let's demonstrate that last query actually in MySQL Workbench. So I've written it right here where I'm selecting the pub ID. I'm going to sum the retail from books grouped by pub ID. And I don't have a where clause. So basically I'm looking at every publisher and I just want to sum the amount of retail for each one. So I'll hit that, and of course it's going to return multiple rows, and now it's adding up the retail column by publisher ID. Now, be careful. As a general rule, and we'll demonstrate this a little later on, every column that you list in the select statement, along with an aggregate function, has to be listed in the GroupBy clause. So if I had more than one column listed in the select statement, I would need both columns in the GroupBy clause. And what's real unfortunate about MySQL is it will not give you an error if you don't follow that rule. It will just give you bad data, and it's hard to recognize that you got bad data. In other systems, if you don't follow that rule, every column in the select has to be in the group by, it will give you an error. It won't even let it run. All right. And we'll demonstrate that in a couple minutes. So let's move on down. Again, we want to emphasize the count star versus count a column. All right, so in the orders table, there's a where are we sending this product, right? There's a ship state column, which just has the state code. Maybe I want to do a count of how many orders are processed for each ship state and how many have actually been shipped. Okay, so I'm going to group by ship state because that's that additional column that's in addition to the 2 aggregate functions I have this time. And I went ahead and threw an order by clause. I'm going to order by the number of orders on that ship, or by ship state. So I run that, scroll up, maybe. There we go. And so here's our ship state and the count of orders. Notice is this Michigan has 1 order, but we haven't shipped anything yet. And if we scroll down far enough, you see that Florida, we've had 5 orders by Florida, but 3 of them have shipped and 2 of them have a null value, so that means they haven't shipped. So count star counts every record returned. Count, and you put in a column name, it's literally counting data values in there. Only those records that have a value. If there's a null marker, it won't count it. Now let's do another example using the customers table out of our bookstore database. So the question being asked is how many orders has each customer placed? So what I want to do is grab their last name for now. We're going to count order num. Okay. And now, by the way, where is the last name? That's in the customers table. Where is the order number? Oh, the order number is in the order table. So I'm asking for information that comes from 2 different tables. So guess what I need to do? I need to join those 2 tables. I'm going to take the orders table, and I've aliased it as O. I'm going to join it to the customers table, aliased at C. And for this case, I use the on clause. So I'm saying the customer number of the order table is the same thing as the customer number of the customer table. Good. Now I have a column up here in my select statement, so guess what? It has to show up in the GroupBy clause. Okay, so if I execute that command, here we go. I now have everybody's last name and how many orders they've placed. Now we have a problem though. I'm familiar with the data and know that we have 2 different Smiths in our database. Well, because we group by last name only, it took all the Smiths and grouped them, and then we have 3 orders in total by all the Smiths. All right, so this is accurate, but it's kind of misleading because really this is over 2 customers, where the rest of these are over 1 customer. So how do we fix that? Well, rather than just grouping by last name, move this down, let's scroll down. We are going to add the first name here. Okay, and now we're going to count the order num. And by the way, I could have counted star here and it would give me the same results. Remember, order num is the primary key of the orders table. Primary keys can never have a null value. So count star and count order num are giving me the same result. So anywho's, I have the last name and the first name. Every time you put a column in the select statement that's in addition to an aggregate function, that column has to be down here in the GroupBy clause. So I got to put it down here also. And now I'm grouping by 2 things. And in essence, what it's going to do is sort first by group, I should say, first by last name. And then within the last name, it will group by first name. And then, of course, it will do a count based on those 2 groupings. The only customer this affects happens to be Smith in this database because that's the only person with the same last name. So when I execute this, scroll down, now we're going to see there's a Jennifer Smith who had 1 order and a Leela Smith who had 2, where before we ran it and we had 3. Okay, so we've got a more accurate count this time, but I had to put 2 columns inside of my GroupBy clause. Now, remember I mentioned every time I put a column in the select statement, it needs to come down in the GroupBy clause. Watch what happens if I leave that off, if I don't put this down here. So basically, I have two columns up here, but I only mentioned the one. So when I run that, I'm going to get some results. I don't get an error. Any other system would give me an error right there. But when I roll down to Smith, I get Smith Leela 3, when Leela only really had 2. So what it did is it grouped by the last name, and if you will, it's just kind of randomly throwing a first name into the data. And so this is absolutely wrong, but especially brand new students to learning SQL don't recognize that it's wrong. And so it's problematic. I wish MySQL treated this like other systems where it would immediately give you an error message and not even let you run that query. So that's why I keep emphasizing that rule. Every column in the select needs to show up in the GroupBy clause. So I'll put it back in, and now that is accurate again. For this next example, I'm going to move to our classic models database just to show you the customers. We have a country column, so the country being USA or Australia, Belgium, Switzerland, Sweden. And within the country, or at least within some countries, we have a state. So obviously United States has states associated with that country. Australia has some states. So here's an example where I want to count how many customers do we have from each country and state. All right, so I am going to, in that database, Classic Models, list the country, list the state, and count. And then it's just from one table this time, just the customers. Every column listed in the select now needs to be in the group by. So when I run that query, here's what I get. Australia has 3 states, and those are the customers. Canada has BC and Quebec, and those are the customers. Anyway, we scroll down far enough. Here's USA. So I have 11 customers from California, 4 from Connecticut, just like that. So in this case, I'm doing, if you will, a double group. First, it groups it. Maybe think of it as sorting, sorts by country. Within the country, it then groups by state. And then, based on those groupings, it will do whatever aggregate function you asked it to do. So in this case, it's count. I'm going to count how many records showed up in the group of USA, California. And that's 11 records. All right, so now let's do a few more examples where things get just a little more complicated, not a lot. Going back to the bookstore database, although it's exactly the same in the classic model database, we have an order items table. Well, what is in the order items table? Let's select star and take a look at that. So I have the order number, and then of course on an order number it shows me what book they bought. In the classic models, this would be the product code. In the bookstore, it's the ISBN. But notice sometimes order numbers repeat themselves. So 1003, well, why is it repeating itself? Because on this order they bought 3 books. Okay, look down here on 1007. They bought 4 different books on that order. And also notice how many books did they buy of that particular ISBN? Well, they bought 3 of them. And so 3 at $72.15 is how much they paid. So the question I want to start answering was, why don't you give me the order total? How much did they spend on this order? How much did they spend on this order? How much did they spend on that order, right? So I want to basically sum the amount spent. Well, how much did they spend? Well, it's going to be 3 times 72 plus 1 times 54 plus 1 times 895 and 1 times 5595. So basically, I have to sum for this particular order all of that that calculation there. Same thing with 1003. I need to sum the fact that they bought 1 book at this price, 1 at that price, and 1 at that price. Okay, so what does that look like? I want to know the order total. Show me how much each has been spent on each order. Here's what it looks like. I'm going to grab the order number. All right, that's in the order items table. And we're going to sum, but I need to sum the quantity times how much they paid. So that, in other words, that's going to be the quantity of 3 times how much they paid from the order items table. And of course, because I have that column up here, I want to group by order number, right? I want to group by 1007 and then sum up that. I want to group by 1003 and sum up that. So when I run that, I will now get, and I'm not using aliases, I should, but the order number and then the order total. right? So here's 1007. They spent $335. 1003 is $106.85. So that's how we can get the order total. So then the question just gets more and more fun, is I want to know how much has been spent by each customer. So how much has Bonita Morales spent at our bookstore? So first I'm going to do it. I'm going to grab her customer number, and I'm going to grab her last name. All right. Now I am going to sum the quantity times paid each, but this time I'm not grouping by order number. I'm grouping by customer number, right? So what does that mean? I'm going to grab, and by the way, where does this information all reside? Well, the customer number and name sits in the customer table, right? In order to connect the customers to the order item table, I have to go through the order table. So customers join orders. There's your customer num. Join order items on order num. And now I'm going to group by number and last name. So in other words, I'm going to grab all those records and, if you will, group or sort by the customer number, and then within customer number, last name. And at that point, I'll start summing those two columns, quantity times paid each. So that will tell me, based on customer number, last name, how much they've spent. And now I'm ordered by column 2, which in this case is the last name. So if I run that, here we go. Here's the customer number. I'm sorted by last name, and now in total, I should alias this. She spent 190. Gianna has spent 379. Blah blah blah. So I'm getting how much each customer has spent. In this example, do I run into that same issue with Smith? Well, actually I don't, because remember there's two different Smiths, but each Smith has their own customer number. So in other words, I do get the word Smith twice down here. One of them's Leela, and one of them's, I forget the other person's name. So I do get both of my Smiths down here because they have unique customer numbers. What if I wanted to display their first name in addition to their last name? All I would have to do is come up here to my select statement and type first name, and then I got to follow my golden rule. I need a comma here. Every time I put a column in the select, it also has to be listed in the GroupBy clause. So now that's going to group by customer number. Within the customer number, last name, which is a little bit nonsensical, right? Because customer number is unique. But nonetheless, this is the rule I got to follow. And now I'm going to sum all the records for that customer number, last name, first name combination. So if I run that again, did I get an error? Yeah, I did. Oh, I spelled first name wrong in the GroupBy clause. That looks better. Okay, so I'll run it. Now what I've done. I think I just had a bad selection. I grabbed part of a comment. So now I'll run it. And I finally get it to run. Let's shrink that up and this down. And so now I'm seeing everybody's first and last name. So it's Jennifer and Leela. But I'm still getting obviously the same result at this point. Okay. What happens if I don't follow the golden rule that I keep emphasizing? And let's say I only put in group by customer number in this case. Well, basically it'll still run and it looks like it's working okay, but it could be that I'm getting weird results. You just don't know for sure on this system, where another system would give you an error by trying to run that. So one more example in this one, and then we'll create another video where we talk about how do we limit what groups we display. But first, what if I wanted to know how much profit we make on each order? Okay, well, how do we determine profit? Well, we know how many books they bought, and we know how much they paid. Well, what did the book cost us? Well, there is a cost column inside the books table, right? So these two columns, quantity times paid each, are sitting in the order items table. The order number is also in the order items table. And then, of course, that cost column is in the books table. So if I want to refer to these columns, I then have to list those tables in my from clause and get them all joined up. In this case, it's just two tables, and so I can join them on that common column called ISBN. Now I only have one column right now in my select statement, so that's the column I put in my group by. I'm going to organize or group my data by the order number, and then for each order number I'm going to do this math. I'm going to do the quantity times how much they paid for the book minus its cost, which is basically the profit. And now when I execute that, here's what I get. So for each of these orders, how much profit did we generate? So 1007, where they bought three books on one line and then three other books, we made quite a bit of profit on that particular order. So taking a look at the EER diagram for our bookstore database, what if the question was how much money has been generated or how many books have been sold by each publisher, right, based on pub ID. So I have a publisher table, the pub ID happens to be here, and then of course the ISBN associated with each publisher's book is right here, and then ISBN is in this order table, right? So if I wanted to do this by publisher name rather than by just the ID, I would have to join the publisher table, the books table, and the order items table. All right, I would group on the publisher name, and then the same thing depending on the question. If it was the sum of how much is sold by publisher for each publisher, I would group by name, and I would be summing the quantity of the books sold times the paid each, but of course based on the publisher name. So you'd be grouping by name, and in your from clause you'd be joining these three tables. If I wanted to know how the number of books purchased by customer by author, all right, so basically I would have to join for all the way from customers to orders, order to order item. I could do order item to the book author table based on ISBN, and then all the way to author. So your from clause would be quite long, right? It'd be 1, 2, 3, 4 tables, which means 3 joins. And then I could do a group by the customer number, maybe the author ID, and then do a count. And then that would show me for each customer how many books they bought by each author. Hopefully you can keep it clear that basically when you're grouping by, if you want to think of it in terms of subtotaling on order number, or if you're using my Excel example, you're kind of sorting by that, and then you're doing whatever this aggregate function is to that group, right? So I, if you will, sort the data by order number, and then for all the same order number, I'm going to sum quantity times paid each, or take the max or the min or the average or whatever your aggregate function is. You're doing that function by the group, and of course you can group by more than one thing at a time. And also don't forget my rule, because students will do this all the time. They will list your columns up here but don't put them in the GroupBy clause, and unfortunately MySQL will run it, and sometimes it's hard to recognize that the data you get is not correct.